Setting up a saltwater tank can be an absolute money pit, especially if you buy equipment you simply don't need, or that is even detrimental to your tank in the early stages. So in this video, I'll show you how to save money on your first saltwater tank, and if you stick around to the end, I'll show you just how much money you can save without compromising on quality and still getting really good equipment. I've already made nano tank budget build videos, which I'll link in the description below, and instead this video is going to focus on a 3 or 4 foot tank, which is a really nice size for your first tank, and importantly is an area you can spend a lot of money you don't need to if you don't know what you're doing, and therefore a tank size where you can save the most money too. The first and one of the biggest areas you can save money on is of course buying a brand new tank. And you really shouldn't be scared of buying a second-hand tank. Now obviously the newer the tank is the better, and if you're pushing over 5 years old, that's at the point when you might start thinking twice, but in reality all good quality tanks should last 10 years, so there's really nothing wrong with buying one that's a couple of years old. And you shouldn't be put off by a tank that looks dirty. Cleaning an old tank is actually really easy. All you need to do is fill it with water and citric acid or Milton's fluid, and that will pretty much melt away any algae in the tank over the course of a few hours, or worst case scenario overnight. You can then just wipe it down and the tank will look absolutely sparkling. For the glass itself, you should look out for scratches on the outside only, as any scratches on the inside of the tank won't be visible when it's filled with water. And the only other thing you should look out for is water damage to the cabinet. And in terms of size, there is one other important thing to think of other than the length, and that is the width. If you have the space, it is well worth going 2 feet front to back rather than the standard 18 inches front to back. The single most expensive part of this hobby is actually upgrading, because you have to start again. But you're far less likely to feel the need to upgrade if you have a wider tank. That will give you loads of extra swimming space, which gives you more options for fish, but crucially it will also enable you to build an absolutely fantastic looking aquascape. On an 18-inch front to back scape, you can end up with quite a steep wall, whereas on 2 feet front to back, it is a much more gentle incline, which looks a lot better and allows you to fit more corals in. In terms of tank options that are 2 feet front to back, the most common are the Red Sea Reefer XL series and the Waterbox Reef series. And you'll almost certainly be able to use the same equipment on a 2 feet front to back tank than you will an 18-inch front to back tank, so that won't cost you any more money. The next area you can save big on is lighting. Now it's really easy when you first get into the hobby to think the most important thing is light, so therefore you need to spend a lot of money getting the best possible piece of equipment. But for your first tank, you don't need the massive power output that your favourite YouTuber or Instagrammer is using on their Aquabora dominated tank. On a 3 or 4 foot tank, 2 of the smaller lights such as the Radion XR15s or AI Hydra 32s will do absolutely fine, and you simply don't need anything more. Now this is another area where going secondhand is absolutely fine, and there are loads of options out there for you to choose from. However, if you're just looking for someone to tell you what the best possible option is, you can't go wrong with the previous generation Radions. At the time of recording this video, the most popular light in the hobby, the Radion XR15, is on its 6th generation. Now Ecotech upgrade to a new generation of Radions roughly every 2 years, which is a really short cycle. But that is great news for you because it means you can get good new technology cheaply. When they do upgrade, people suddenly think they need the latest and greatest technology, so the Gen 5 Radion is currently on sale all over the place on forums and on eBay. But it was an absolutely fantastic light 6 months ago, and it is still an absolutely fantastic light today, and I guarantee your corals won't appreciate any difference between the Gen 5 and the Gen 6. And as a Brucey bonus, when you're buying secondhand, people often throw in the mounting brackets for free, which usually cost in the order of £100 each. And the next area we're going to save money on is filtration. Firstly, by spending less money on a filter itself, and secondly, by avoiding the trap of buying unnecessary filtration that you don't need. In terms of filtration, a skimmer is usually the beating heart of a system with a sump, and that is the piece of equipment I'm going to suggest you buy. Now there are a ton of options out there, and some do have slightly different features to the other, but all of the big makes like Nios, Red Sea and Deltec offer really good products, and you won't go far wrong no matter what one you buy. And skimmers are actually probably one of the best things to get secondhand because it's really easy to strip them down and clean them. And using the same technique you use to clean that dirty tank, all you need to do is dip the skimmer in citric acid water overnight, then watch the algae drip off the next day. And the great thing about this is that the part of a skimmer that usually clogs up the most is the pump, and all pumps are really easy to take apart. You simply pop out the impeller, give it a good old clean, put it back together, Bob's your uncle. Your skimmer will then come up looking absolutely brand new, and as with any piece of equipment in the hobby that is around 2 or 3 years old, it's really unlikely to go wrong, so you really shouldn't worry about going second hand. And now I'm going to ask you a question. Is a skimmer enough filtration on its own for a 3 or even 4 foot tank? Or do you need something like a Fujifilm or an automatic filter roller to cope with all the bioload? Well, the answer is quite simply you do not need anything else apart from a skimmer, especially in the early days. In fact, the chances are you'll probably have your skimmer turned off for the first couple of weeks while you build up some kind of nutrients in the system, otherwise it will be completely and utterly sterile. And for that reason, it's actually better to have less filtration in the early stages when you don't have a ton of fish in your tank and you're not feeding particularly heavy. And indeed, if you overfilter a tank in the first 3 to 6 months, you're more likely to strip out nutrients altogether, which is a lot worse than having high nutrients, and often leads to things like dinoflagellates, which are a really nasty pest to get rid of. So don't buy any more filtration equipment, and in fact the only extra thing you might need is a phosphate reactor after 3 or 4 months when your phosphate levels slowly start to build up. And the next area we're going to save money on is the return pump. Now, a return pump is a mission critical piece of equipment because it moves water from your sump to your main tank, so that means if it dies, you won't be getting heating in your main tank and the water won't be getting filtered. So that of course means it actually is one area worth spending a bit of money on, right? Well, actually no. If you really want the comfort of buying brand new, the Jekod Powerheads are absolutely fantastic. They've been used by many people in the hobby for years and have a really good reputation for reliability. They're also all controllable from 30 to 100% and really quiet. But if you want to take comfort from one of these sexier brands like Ecotech, that is also an excellent place to go secondhand. Now, just as with the pumps you get in a skimmer, it is really easy to strip down and clean a return pump. These things are designed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years on end, so you really shouldn't be scared of getting one that's a couple of years old. And I promise you it's an absolute piece of cake to strip down a return pump, and you really shouldn't be put off. Any old idiot can do it. But not all of my recommendations are to go secondhand, and actually when it comes to Powerheads, for whatever reason, I find that they don't do so well out of water as things like return pumps and skimmers. Now, the Ecotech MP40 is the best selling Powerhead in the hobby, and for very good reason. They kick out a ton of flow and they're really easy to maintain by simply swapping out the wet side, giving it a good old scrub down and then popping it back in. But they are very expensive, and really the features you get with them are mainly for the benefit of you rather than the corals. So any of the cheaper DC powered alternatives will be just as good for your tank, which at the end of the day is why we're here in the first place. The only thing I would say if you go for the Jekod Powerheads is to try to oversize it if at all possible. Sometimes they are a little bit underpowered, so it's far better to have one that's too big and turn it down. Now, that completes the list of things you can save money on that should be on your shopping list, but there are also areas you can save money on by not buying equipment you don't need. And the first thing in that category is bottles and potions. With the possible exception of bottle bacteria, if it comes in a bottle, you do not need it for your first tank. And crucially, that includes things like dosing liquids to maintain alkalinity and calcium, coral food, which corals just do not need, and things like Nopox or carbon dosing, which are there to control nutrients. And as we've established earlier, low nutrients is a bad thing, so the last thing you need is more filtration stripping those out. It's not that bottled products are not beneficial at all for any tank, it's just that they're supposed to be used in mature tanks that are full of corals. In a tank like that, whatever you're putting in will be taken up and absorbed by the corals, whereas in a brand new tank, if you only have a handful of corals, all of the stuff you're pouring into your tank will instead start feeding random pests. You also really don't need automatic testers, and all they'll do is add a layer of unnecessary complexity. Automatic testers are absolutely fantastic for later down the line when you have thousands of pounds invested in corals in your tank. But in the early days, it is far better to test things yourself so you get to know your tank, and really the main thing that automatic testers test for is alkalinity, which doesn't matter when you're first setting up. You also don't need any kind of aquarium controller or monitoring equipment. They are really useful again later down the hobby when you have several £1000s invested, but the chances are none of the equipment you've bought in the early days is going to fail, so you don't need a notification telling you when that happens. And ultimately, in the early days, all an aquarium controller or monitor will do is add unnecessary expense and complexity to the hobby. And even if you're a bit of a gadget freak and don't mind spending the extra money, in the early days it's really important to focus on your tank and learn what's going on. But if you've got a fancy aquarium controller that you've spent several £100s on, all you're going to want to do is play with that. So all in all then, there are some pieces of equipment that are absolutely fantastic secondhand buys and will save you an absolute fortune. And if you don't want to buy secondhand, the budget end of the hobby is where you should be looking. You do get benefits with more expensive equipment, but almost exclusively it will benefit you, the hobbyist, rather than your corals. So while more expensive equipment is generally better, you get much better value for money and bang for your buck at the budget end of the hobby. And that brings us neatly onto the amount of money that you'll be saving. For a nearly new tank of around a year old, you should be able to save at least 30%, which on the 2 tanks I've recommended is around £420. In terms of lighting, even with a really high-end light, you should be able to save almost £300, and a skimmer should be about half price. We've established you don't need a filter roller, so that will save you a further £300, and again a return pump will probably be around half price, so that's a further £150. I've also included a category of miscellaneous items, which includes all the bottles of coral food and dosing liquids you don't need, and could even be much higher if you include things like dosing pumps, aquarium controllers, and aquarium monitors. All of which gives you a saving of around £1,500, despite still buying really good quality equipment that won't take any enjoyment out of your hobby, and crucially, won't affect your tank in any adverse way. Now, if there are other areas you can save on than I've missed, let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe for next week. And until next time, happy reefing.